Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Dynamic Careers in IO Psychology panel. Our panel is hosted by the University of Maryland IO Master's program, and with us we have 3 IO professionals who are also alumni of our program. So we're very excited and very grateful to them for being with us today and sharing with us about their career. So I'd love to give everyone on the call a quick intro for each of our panelists, and then we're going to dive right into having them speak to us a little bit more about their careers. And we'll also, for the second half of the panel discussion, we'll open it up for any questions that our participants might have for our panelists as well. So, you know, when everyone registered for this event, you might have seen our information blurb that we had here. So, you know, one thing I wanted to share, and part of why we wanted to bring our panelists together in this unique panel, is that when we think of IO psychology, we really think of a lot of the kind of traditional paths of IO. So going into traditional selection work or training work, performance management work, sometimes you know, organizational change work in private corporations. So we have these kind of strict paths that we might think about as you know, what it means to be an IO psychologist. But one of the reasons that we were really interested in getting our 3 panelists together was each of them have taken really unique career paths, which is why we want to have them share with us today a little bit more about their career to highlight what IO psychology can be outside of what we might think of as these traditional paths. So with that, I'd like to welcome our 3 panelists, Danielle Ulrich, Nathan Price, and Cali Moore. So welcome, and thank you to each of our panelists for being here. So I'm going to share a quick intro, a bio for each of our panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over for them to chat with us. So Danielle is a seasoned international development professional. She focuses on democracy and governance, organizational development, and peace and stability initiatives that promote meaningful change around the world. As a managing director of programs in the Middle East and North Africa division of Chemonics International, she blends intensive experience in the field with principles of organizational psychology for interdisciplinary approach to managing a portfolio of 14 complex programs across 7 different countries. And Danielle brings a proven track record of leadership and management to address complex issues, motivate teams, and apply data-driven approaches to achieve programmatic success and deliver results. She holds a bachelor's degree in international relations, master's degree in foreign policy with a focus on security policy, and a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology. She specializes in cross-cultural communications, managing large teams across multiple countries, project implementation, and USAID programming. And in her free time, Danielle's the lead singer of a cover band, which is really cool. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Nikki.
Sure. I'd like to introduce our 2 other panelists as well, and then I'm going to turn it over to them. So our second panelist that I'd like to introduce is Nathan Price, the academic IO, and he is an industrial organizational psychology practitioner who works within educational institutions. So Nathan is the founder of the Academic IO, a firm that works with university officials to improve the culture and functionality with data-driven best practices. He works with the University of Minnesota as a talent strategy consultant, and his affiliations include the Membership Service and Engagement Committee lead in Blacks in IO, PSYOP Visibility Committee member, and the Black Faculty and Staff Association Vice President at the University of Minnesota. He graduated with his master's in IO psychology from the University of Maryland and is an alum of Henderson State University, where he obtained 2 bachelors in business management and psychology. Welcome, Nate.
Thank you so very much for the opportunity. Greatly.
Thank you. And our third panelist is Cali Moore. Cali has over 10 years of program and training management from roles across nonprofits, government, and higher education. She's a dedicated advocate for employee engagement and workplace skill development, especially for those new to the workforce and for those working in nonprofits and public service organizations. She's skilled in public speaking, training management, and social impact strategies, and committed to advancing equitable solutions through stakeholder management. And Kelly has earned her master's in industrial organizational psychology, also from the University of Maryland in 2021. Welcome, Kelly.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be here.
Thank you. So right now, what I'd love to do is turn it over to our panelists because they have prepared some slides and some information that they'd like to share with all of you about their career paths and the roles that they've held. So Danielle, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Thanks to you and Roya for the opportunity. No pressure, sharing my screen first. Hopefully I do it correctly. Do you see the presentation? Excellent.
We see it.
and not my email inbox. That's always a good day. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Once again, really excited to talk to all of you about a little bit more about what I do and how I've taken the principles of IO psychology and kind of blended it together with the work I was already very passionate about to begin with, which is international development. So I don't know if anybody has any guesses of where this country is on my first slide. There's kind of a cheat in it. If you know the country, there's a big landmark right at the top that's very famous for this country. It's okay if you don't know it too. But it is the country of Georgia, which is one of my favorite places to go in the world. And this is the mother of Georgia at the top. So this is a picture I took on a trip. So I thought we could talk a little bit first about my career path. I did do my undergraduate work in international relations, focusing on security policy. I thought I was going to be in the CIA. Life taught me otherwise, that was not going to be well suited to my personality style. But that was the plan at the time. And I got a master's in international relations. And later, many years later, I decided to look at IO psychology, and that is my second master's degree. Early in my career, I worked at American University at the library, big fan of it. I got the opportunity to manage a lot of undergraduate students for a number of years, and that was really where I got my start managing large teams, managing diverse teams, you know, adapting my management style to all different types of individuals that I was working with. So I like to think that that's where my management experience really started. And then I moved over to international development. Shortly after that, I've had the good fortune to support projects across the globe. My first project was in Afghanistan. I had the incredible opportunity to travel to Kabul for my first assignment. I've also supported projects in Ukraine, Georgia, Kosovo, Pakistan, West Africa, Haiti, and now I focus on the Middle East and North Africa. Like I put on here, my pandemic project was going back to school. I should have stuck to the sourdough starter. It died though, and I was like, well, school's the next easiest thing to do. Kidding, of course. I really enjoyed the program, and throughout, I was really fortunate to have Nikki as my mentor. And I struggled a little bit with, I really like my career in international development. Can I bring what I'm learning to that and kind of expand my career in different ways? So that's what I did. This is some very delicious food also in Georgia. If you ever have the opportunity to go to a Georgian restaurant, I highly recommend it. So a little bit more about my current work in international development. I work for a company called Chemonics International. We are a contractor for the US government. We work primarily with the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, to implement projects around the world. And the projects we implement can range from education programs, targeted at early grade reading improvement. They can be agriculture programs, working with small farmers, grant making so that they can improve their business. My personal technical expertise is peace and stabilization programming. I use that security policy eventually. and it came out in that. So I work primarily in post-conflict settings, peacemaking, peace building. So I'm currently the managing director for programs, as Nikki kindly mentioned. And I oversee 14 programs in 7 countries. What that means in practicality is I have a portfolio of projects that I'm responsible for highlighting best practices, making sure that we are meeting our budgets, making sure that our teams are running efficiently. I coach and supervise the 12 direct reports, which is new for me and a lot. Yeah, if you were thinking that, it is indeed a lot. And so I really enjoy getting to know our teams and our projects around the world. And so it's been really enriching. And I've, in this new role, which is new right after I graduated, actually, I got this new role, and it's been a way to really use my degree. And we'll talk about that in just a second. This is in Amman, Jordan. Lovely place. Definitely recommend it. So how have I used my degree? Why we're here to talk about it. So these are just a few ways. Professional development and coaching. I've had the really good fortune to work with some of our teams around the globe, most recently in Ukraine, on kind of some professional development and international training. So on topics such as emotional intelligence, performance management, and performance assessment. How do we do that? What does it look like? How is management different than assessment? My IO heads know. So I've had the really good fortune to do that with our large teams around the world. Actually, for professional and development and coaching, of my 12 supervisees, some are very new in their role, up through about to retire. So it is a span, and they all have very different needs. And my IO background now allows me to really pivot and kind of develop customized training programs and really dig into what they each need from me as their supervisor for their growth. Along with that comes performance management. I'm actually in the process of rewriting performance expectations for all of the directors in our division. So taking the job requirements, translating that to what are the expectations from that. So very applicable work. Strategic planning for the year. We do a work plan in our division. My division in the US is about 100 employees, and then globally, probably around 1,000, all the projects put together. Reorganizations and mergers, very interestingly, this was my thesis topic, because at the time, my division was merging with another division. And so, having an IO background was really helpful to help me kind of steer the department in terms of how can we be efficient, how can we be effective, how can we ensure that the cultures, the work styles of both of these departments are both heard and represented. Talent management, it's a big team, and I work with fantastic HR business partners on issues of strategic staffing, looking at the trends in the labor market and saying, this is what we need to be doing. This is how we need to get ahead of this in terms of retention. Team building and troubleshooting. My many different teams with many different styles, as you know, sometimes there's trouble that comes up, or there's disagreements, and I've really been able to dig into some really interesting leadership management issues and kind of provide recommendations on how to work through that. And then employee engagement and retention. We have an annual employee engagement survey, and I've been able to analyze the results of that and make recommendations for our department on how we can move forward and be better. Yeah, so I don't know if I took 10 minutes. This is in Senegal on another work trip. But yeah, that's what I had. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Danielle. I'm going to turn it over to Nate.
All righty, now let's go ahead. I promise you I'm gonna struggle with this, but we're gonna make it. So if it beeps, hey, we're here. Hello everyone, my name is Nathan Price, and I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about consulting in higher ed. Overall, I'm gonna bring you 2 lenses. One working at the University of Minnesota as a talent strategy consultant, and the other will be working as an academic IO with other institutions as well. So I'll give you this background. At the University of Minnesota, I work as a talent strategy consultant. So within that team, I have talent acquisition, talent performance management, supervisor development, leadership development, and also employee engagement. So it is an IO playground at the University of Minnesota. And also I work as a consultant and coach as well. So I bring developmental aspects utilizing Hogan and 360s for leadership development, and also co-facilitating leading on all levels and supervisor development. Overall, with the work that I do, I work with senior leaders, department heads, deans, all the way around on their strategy, also coaching and the leadership development within many work streams as well. And with me working at the University of Minnesota, I want everyone that's thinking about working at a university, knowing how decentralized environments work. It is a stride and not a sprint, because trust me, many of the things you'll be working with systems, and understanding the difference between faculty and staff is very important, I promise you. So just understanding the ecosystem is critical in the work that I do. So skills needed as an internal consultant. So I know beforehand, I always preach the art of translating. One thing that I know working with senior leaders, you never know where they get their energy from. I have ranted with many leaders saying, oh my gosh, this is what I did using data analytics, and I lose them. So you have to know who you're working with. You have to know the client that you're working with, and also know how to reach them as well. So this also goes into the coaching aspect of work. So learn the art of coaching, knowing how to bring in your expertise, and also know how to translate that with the leader, so then they can be able to make actionable, I want to say, strategic plans overall, because many of the things that we work with, we are the experts in developing the organization. So being able to translate what's truly needed, and also carry the leader to bringing in those practices, those evidence-based practices. It can be a little difficult if you just come in as saying, this is what you need to do, this is how this works. Being in higher ed is very political. So make sure that you know how to develop, also how to use influence as well. Because without influence, you may hit a lot of brick walls if you come in and saying, this is what you need to do. So being very flexible in the language that you have is necessary. Report writing. So the reports that you write inside the program, trust me, there's more to come, and they don't stop at all. So it's very fun. And building executive reports, usually when I am done with clients and I give them the recommendations that I have, is building reports to say, this is how you navigate afterwards. And then we follow up to see the benefits of the intervention that we give. And last but not least, emphasizing your expertise and the value that you bring in the team. One thing that I know is many individuals don't know what IO psychology is. And if I'm playing around with a new client, I always say that IO is HR on steroids. So, and they are able to get it overall, but also being able to say how we bring in the evidence-based practices is necessary, and also the ways that we can. And I give a lot of examples of the work that I do beforehand when working at the University of Minnesota. So skills needed to be an external consultant. So emphasizing your expertise, and you probably be like, oh my gosh, she's repeating this. No, this is very essential in the consulting that you will be doing. Because one thing that I know is when you're giving your story of how you utilize evidence-based practices to advance the institution, it can sometimes, if they don't know what we do, it can be like, oh, you're just fibbing. You don't know what's happening really. So then actually being able to say how you practice IO psychology within the work that you do will help bridge the gap overall. And something else, if you're looking to be an external consultant, is developing your methodologies to stand out from competitors overall, because we're battling with MBAs, so many different fields as well. And for example, when I came into University of Minnesota, I definitely started looking at social network analysis and how it impacts team efficiency. And they're like, oh my goodness. Some individuals, when going into it, saying who you go to and building that influence, also looking at the expertise. Some people got it, some people don't. So going back into the art of translation is very essential. Also establishing your interventions that you will utilize with the work that you do. As you go through your programs or as you develop as an IO, make sure that you write everything down that you are doing and also a play-by-play. And you may have to change a lot of the language up while also changing a little bit of the system up, but also when you write this down, this will be beneficial for your practice. And finally, I'm starting to see that coaching is becoming a trend within the work that we do as IO consultants and practitioners, because one thing that we know is there's a lot of resistance when trying to move a leader into utilizing practices that they're not familiar with or making extreme changes as well. So building the art of coaching, using the influence, using the trust that you have will be beneficial with the work that you do as well. And final tips, I don't know if that was 10 minutes, but here are some tips that I learned from the program and also from the work that I've been doing. The one thing that I learned from the program is never work harder than your client is. And I promise you, I take that with the work that I do, the interventions that I make as well. Because one thing that I know is it takes the leader to set the tone for the work that we do within academia as well. So also for students, network through volunteering in local groups. I know the program really was essential in the ways that I networked and that I was able to connect with others that were in the field while also looking at those that were potential clients as well. So don't feel afraid to put yourself out there and create an ongoing log on the projects that you do. This will help with building your methodology, and this will also help with building your interventions as well, because you'll be able to pull from the projects that you've been doing and how you'll be able to influence the work that you do. And have at least 1 or 2 papers prepared to publish. Thank you, Nikki, for giving me that insight a long time ago, because it's definitely been beneficial. And also something to highlight, if you're not in the program yet, I definitely will say hop in, because one thing that I know is one of the HBR style articles that I've written is still utilized today at the work that I do. So thank you for the program and all that you've taught me. It has been beneficial, and I am just happy to say that now I work in academia, trying to make the workforce better in the ways that I can with senior leaders and leaders across the board. So, and finally, you know, I had to be a plug-in for some of the work that's coming out. So we have the IOPIA Virtual Summit. I'm very excited, where we'll be training and developing senior leaders, HR representatives, and the decision makers within academia in data-driven ways to improve their workforce as well. So if you want to know a little bit more, to be a volunteer or to actually speak as one of the side speakers, let me know. There are speed learning sessions that are 15-minute recordings, and we'll be happy to share your expertise. Also, if you're interested in learning a little bit more, we have IOs in higher ed, LinkedIn group as well. And the only thing you have to do is get connected to me and say you want to be part of the group, and I'll get you in there. There are some conversations going on, and also resources shared through those that work within academia. And also, look me up on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to connect with you. If there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. We are one big happy IO family, and I'll be happy to assist. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nate, and for the kind words. Yeah, definitely. One thing you brought up is the connections, and I'm sure we'll dive into this conversation a little bit later on in the sessions today, but the connections are so important in a field like IO. Yeah. Thank you. I'd love to turn it over to Cali now.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I feel like it kind of works that I'm going last to wrap it up, since I've done a little bit in international work. I've done a little bit in higher ed. So I'm going to talk about that, as well as my work in nonprofits and public service. So now let me see if I can share my screen. All right. And let me hit present mode once I move everyone. Also, apologies for the very aggressive blue light filters on my glasses. I'm on the computer all the time, so it works out, but I forget sometimes. It means you can't see my face, but that's all right. Yeah, so like I mentioned, I've kind of had a very windy career that's hit higher ed, a few different nonprofits and government. And so I'm really excited to talk about that, as well as how that all connects to my journey in IO. So mostly kind of the thread that goes through all of the work that I've had in different areas is that it all has been regarding social impact work and basically service to others. So all of the organizations I worked with have been very mission driven, really in service to some sort of mission that they're working on to help the community. And then my role that I've tended to take and why I'm here as an IO is to really help kind of the people of that organization get the support they need so that they can serve others to the best of their ability. So I've been doing this work for about 10 years now or so, and came to IO a little bit later in that. And so a lot of my IO moments were just like, oh my gosh, if I had only had this sooner, this would have been amazing, but I'm glad I did it when I did it. Like Danielle, it was kind of my pandemic project. I was in the first cohort, I think that was totally virtual, and it ended up working out really well. So in terms of my work history, I got started through AmeriCorps. So if anyone is familiar with AmeriCorps, if you've done AmeriCorps service, shout it out in the chat. I'd love to connect. So this is a national service program where people dedicate usually 1 year. It could be a little more or less to public service. So you're matched with a nonprofit for the year. So I did that service here in DC. And because of that, I was then able to work at AmeriCorps federal headquarters for the year, actually supporting all the nonprofits across the country that get AmeriCorps grants. Sorry, my cats are not so happy to hear about my service, I guess. So between my work at AmeriCorps headquarters and then later on, I moved to a nonprofit that was a national supporter of AmeriCorps as well. I was able to kind of support the 300 plus organizations a year that receive AmeriCorps grants to kind of figure out what are the services that we could provide them to help them elevate the support that they have for those that are volunteering. After doing this work for a while, I ended up at the University of Maryland's Do Good Institute. So if you're a current student or you're thinking about being a student, definitely check them out. They're part of the School of Public Policy, but open to anyone. And this is for students who are interested in social impact work. So I was teaching social impact kind of classes and workshops and organizing some programs there while I was also getting my master's. And then finally, I'm actually currently in a private sector role. So this isn't new for me, but I was able to get this role because of my IO degree, but I'm consulting with Peace Corps. So it's very familiar to me. So it's really cool to be able to bring my social impact service along with my IO degree to be an organizational change management consultant for the Peace Corps right now. And the reason I think I was able to get this role was because of my very non-traditional service, but then I got the degree in IO, which has been amazing. So I wanted to share a couple different projects that I've worked on and some of my career highlights. And again, some of these I did before I got the degree, but one of the reasons I was pulled to IO, because again, I was that person of what is IO psychology? I've never heard of this, was because I had an excellent mentor who had his degree in organizational development. So because of his just amazing mentorship and work skills, I was introduced to the whole field and then really wanted to get my own degree. So the two projects I wanted to call out that I thought led the most to kind of my IO experience and what I liked was while I was working at Service Year Alliance, which again was that kind of national organization helping all different nonprofits that have service members. We noticed that there was just so much disconnect between different programs. Again, there's about 300 different ones of people's experience. And so some people had a ton of support. Other people never, ever heard from a program lead or anything like that. We're kind of left out there to figure it out themselves. And so we decided that we wanted to try to create some sort of unified experience. And one of the best ways to do this was to understand, what is some universal experience we could figure out? And then how do we create some guides and support to make sure everyone could get the resources that they need. So I was part of a team that did a ton of focus groups, surveys to figure out, what are the key criteria and topics people are interested in. We developed tons of resource guides, and then we had to figure out what was the right learning management system in order to get these in front of our audience. So that was, again, where I was really mentored in IO principles and realized I could do this full time. I really love doing this. And then another important part of my nonprofit journey has been, again, just trying to synthesize, unfortunately with nonprofits, when you're not profit driven, and don't always have as many resources, and I'll talk about this a little later. Sometimes, people are really overworked. They may not have the best systems or tools in order to do what they need. And so I've always been trying to be that person to figure out, okay, if you're doing it this way and you're doing it this way, what's the system that we could use to kind of unify those processes? And is there any tech tool or kind of way that this is being done right now that's low cost, easy solution that we might be able to use? So I've been on a few different system changes for the few organizations I've worked on to say, okay, we're going to go away from Excel spreadsheets and emails and try to use some sort of unified system. And again, with nonprofits, you're not always getting the fanciest, most expensive system. Sometimes you're kind of piecing things together. And so that change adoption is so important to really understand what are people's pain points. How do I help you, figure out how this is going to actually work within your role so that you can do what you do best, which is whatever the job you have is to serve others towards that mission. So those are just a few project highlights, but if anything else on this slide piques your interest, I'm happy to talk about it more. And finally, I just wanted to pull out a few other topics that I've found have been pretty universal in my nonprofit journey that I thought were the most related to IO. And if you have worked in nonprofits or higher eds and these sound right, I'd love to hear it. If you have other ones, let me know too. Very interested. This is Luna. She's also very interested. Okay. So the one thing about nonprofits, as I mentioned, is they are mission-driven organizations, which is really great. It's, there's an issue in the community. There's something that we see that we want to make a change for our world. What is the vision we're working towards? What's the mission that we have, and how do we get towards that? Which I've always found really meaningful to me. I really find that to be really important. But the one challenge that nonprofits then have is because you're not driven by what makes profitable sense, that sometimes, there's always more to do. There's always more people to serve. There's always more programs you could have. So scope creep is really a problem, and you're usually finding very dedicated staff. So people kind of working themselves to the bone can also be a problem. So what I've found is, being an IO, you can really help make that business case for what is actually working. What does staying in scope look like? So the business fundamentals of business class, I thought was really great because you don't get a lot of MBAs working in nonprofits, or maybe you do, but just not the ones I've worked at. And so if you have an IO degree and you have some sort of business sense where you can understand that they're going to have a people first mindset, but you still have to keep the lights on. So how can you help guide people towards those smart business decisions? And then there's other parts of employee engagement, again, that are so important because, usually a salary is not the thing that's going to keep someone in a nonprofit, but what are other supports you could create? Are there good mentorship programs, learning development programs? I've worked at nonprofits that close offices once in the summer and usually once over the holidays. Are there other benefits you can give your employees that really help? And so having that IO mindset of what keeps employees engaged and happy, and that's kind of in scope for nonprofits, is really important. Kind of to go off this, resource management, as you have limited resources, and that can be straining, really being a person who can come in with that analytical mindset to think, okay, let's do some well-crafted surveys, not just thrown together, on our programs to figure out what's actually making a difference. Where are we seeing success? If there's a bunch of different programs, but we can figure out, wow, these ones have much better attendance, or these ones, is where we're seeing the most change in the people that we're working with, then you can really make that case again to focus on certain processes or programs and hopefully try to guide people away from things that aren't working. Can be easier said than done, I'm sure, in every sector as people kind of have their pet projects. But I think that analytical mindset of really showing some data can help. And again, people in nonprofits maybe don't always have those skills, or they've kind of learned it along the way. And so I found the classes, even though they were very challenging for me, were some of the best, because it really gave me that foundation of analytical thinking and data management to understand, oh, I can actually, run some analysis on this and have some information to back up what I'm saying in terms of the programs we're running. And then the last kind of topic I wanted to call out is the focus on DEI, so diversity, inclusion, equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging. There's so many different important ways this comes into nonprofits. So many nonprofits exist because they want to make a positive difference in the world. They want our world to be equitable. However, nonprofits have just as many challenges depending on how they were founded or how their work is decided or where their work is. I've definitely seen a lot of white saviorism issues, white supremacy culture in nonprofits. So even the people who think they're helping can sometimes, perpetuate the systemic issues that are occurring. And again, being resource strapped means DEI is usually something nonprofits say they want to work on, but it's actually, putting the right people, the right resources behind it. And so I was really grateful to the IO program to really have DEI integrated into every single class. It wasn't just, oh, we're going to talk about it in one unit or one class. And I thought that was a great way to kind of model what nonprofits could and should be like. And something to advocate for is, how do you integrate DEI throughout all work, from hiring, promoting and supporting staff, to the way business or nonprofit programs are decided, to rethinking any processes that aren't exactly working anymore. And so I think having an IO mindset when it comes to DEI in a nonprofit is another really powerful thing. So yeah, that's my kind of quick summary of a little bit of my nonprofit work and government social impact, and the skills that I found to be the most important and that really stood out for me. And again, even though I kind of came to IO a little mid-career, I would say, having that foundation, so many aha moments of like, oh, this is exactly right. This makes so much sense. And now I feel like I've been able to level up my game because I have actual data, resources and training behind some of these things that I'm proposing. So yeah, happy to talk about anything further. And I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Callie. It's really interesting to hear about, specifically the kind of work that you would do in nonprofit organizations and how IO really feeds into that. And all three of you talked about that. And it's very, I think, helpful to hear for me, for our participants, everyone. So, I think I want to start off by, again, just saying that it's really useful and valuable to hear about your work and how you've brought in the different knowledge and skills of an IO psychologist into your own unique path. And it's just super valuable to hear about the different ways in which IO can really be utilized. Like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that there are all of the traditional paths that I think we do know about, we learn about when you kind of Google IO psychologist, are the first ones that pop up. But to hear from your unique paths is such a cool perspective. I really want to maximize the time that our participants have to connect with each of our panelists. So I would love to, have a kind of a more conversation feel, whether you want to unmute or pop into the chat and hear from some of our participants who are attending this, this panel discussion, and what kinds of questions you might have for our panelists. So again, please feel free to unmute or just pop into the chat, and Roya and I will monitor the chat and make sure that your question is answered. So I'll give you all just a minute here. I think while we're waiting for some of our participants to pop in some questions, one thing I'd like to kind of start us off with is, and this isn't directed to any one of you, so anyone that would like to answer, what would you recommend for a student or early career professional or somebody trying to change careers who's trying to figure out what area they want to go into or trying to figure out in what ways they can apply their skills?
Good question. I'll start because this is pretty relevant to me because the IO program, I was able to make a career shift, but I stayed kind of within the topics and the work areas and projects that I've found to be really important to me. So I think, first of all, something that I found really helpful, especially starting out, was like your first job, if you're right out of college, isn't necessarily going to be your best job, your favorite job, your perfect job, or anything. I think, I think this is a little more common, but kind of getting away from the idea that once you graduate, you should know exactly what you're doing. You should have your focus area. You should, be kind of ready to hit the ground running. Typically isn't the case. And I think after a couple of years, with work peers, people about the same age at first kind of realize like, oh, we're all figuring this out together. So something I found really helpful was just trying to try as many different projects as I could. I think the one benefit of nonprofit work is because you're so resource strapped. Usually, if you want to say, hey, I'd love to try something new or help out, people are almost always more than welcome to have you jump onto a project. And so because of that, I was able to, hopefully not overwork myself, but sign up to a bunch of different projects, see a problem, kind of offer a solution and say, hey, I've noticed this thing. I'd love to try to fix it in this way. So because of that, I was really able to try a bunch of different work styles and things, especially being in here in DC. I've tried lobbying, didn't like it, but I did it. I've tried, writing reports, not my jam. Then I was able to do more training management and I was like, oh, this I really like. So I think I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that I like this, but because I tried different things, I was able to slowly start to more focus. And once I realized I love training management, I love employee engagement, I love also like internal employee training. That brought me to IO, but that's what led me to do a career switch. So I was able to now work in a private sector consulting firm, but I'm still advocating for the training specialist skills that I have and the organizational change skills I have. So that's hopefully answers the question a little bit of basically kind of leaning in on trying everything at first, figuring out what I really like, trying different things. And then once I was able to specialize, really advocating how that specialization could work in any sector. It doesn't matter that my experience was in nonprofits. It switches to government really easily. It switched to private really easily. So that's kind of how I've been able to navigate that career change process.
And I'm just going to add one little piece: honor your path. I promise you, the experiences that you have beforehand, even before getting your degree, I promise you, the systematic thing that we have, you were an IO before you were an IO. So when you get that piece of paper, hey, it's accreditation, but just know to validate the experience that you had because, hey, you've been working in the field and also you've had that mindset for a while. So don't negate yourself. Don't say, oh, I can't do this because I don't have a degree. Just know that you are growing into the profession that you're going to be. So be open.
And with that, I was just going to add, don't be shy to highlight the transferable skills that you do already have. I think, both before the program and after, you'd be surprised if you say, well, I know something about that. I know something about recruitment. I actually I did this at work. I actually wrote a paper on recruitment. Thank you, Ken. And how I think we could maybe do selection a little bit better. And, that was taken up. I didn't think anybody would care about that paper, but they did. And, they're working through it now. So don't be shy to highlight the skills that you have either.
Thank you. So I see we have a few questions that have popped into the chat here. So I'll start off with the first one here. How did you describe your IO psychology experience when you interviewed for jobs?
Ladies first.
I was to say, I only, after this program, interviewed internally to my own company, which is a little bit different, but the way they made me do a whole presentation. It was a whole thing. But the way I described it, I think Nathan talked about the translation function too, and that works with talking about your degree as well in IO psychology. I usually resort to the psychology of people in the workplace and how to be like efficient and effective, and which for me, given the management level or the management position I was applying to, was attractive for that role because I could say things like, you know, performance optimization and employee retention and engagement. So, you know, I think for me, you kind of take what the job is kind of asking for and highlight the IO skills and talk about it that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I did just do like a total hiring. I applied for a new job, like I said, sector switch. So I just did all this. And yeah, I think it's really leaning in on the specific skills. So instead of necessarily, I don't feel like I tried to summarize my entire IO degree or experience, but mostly, you know, mentioned it and then picked out what skills or classes I thought were the most relevant. And for me, I feel like the thing that I highlighted the most was that it was a very practical degree, and that because we were, you know, everybody was mostly working full time, you're working with other professionals, you're doing a lot of mock consulting projects. I feel like the things I drew on were, you know, being able to work really well with others, but pulling in an academic foundation for things that not everyone necessarily has an academic foundation in. So I think that's where I leaned into the program is, you know, anybody might say they understand training management or how to do a right survey or kind of analytical thinking, but like I actually have the classes now to back up the skills. So that's where I feel like in my interview processes that came out was again really picking out certain skills and classes and then describing that experience.
And also I'll just add a little bit more network, just because the way that I was able to get my position at University of Minnesota, it was more of that networking aspect. Doing informational interviews will be beneficial if there's a spot that you want to get into. You just have to make sure you ask the right questions. I was lucky and blessed to have my director see me, and we just talked about academia overall. I can't go into the questions because, you know, hey, that's for another conversation, but that is the way that I was able to get my gig at the University of Minnesota, and also being able to translate the things that I was doing beforehand with business development and at other institutions as well.
Thank you. The next question that I see here is, do we need to have kind of the basics in psychology before pursuing IO psychology?
I didn't.
I didn't either.
I did. I'm just, okay, I'm the eyeball, but I will say some of the things and some of the trends that you have from psychology, it is beneficial, especially with utilizing SPSS for a lot of the data analytics that we utilize. But other than that, no, you can learn. You definitely can learn the systems and processes as well. So.
Thank you. So next question we have here is from Mary. What credentials do you recommend for students to have upon graduation, if any, and the 5 W's on getting those?
You know, I'm going to hop in on this one a little bit. One thing is to get individuals or the next company that you will be working for is to pay for those accreditations overall and credentials, I would say, because they get very expensive. And being a student is, I would say, sometimes unrealistic to be like, oh, I want to get Hogan certified when you're paying for the program. Because me being Hogan certified, that is $2,500. So I would have not been able to do that overall. So I would definitely say be very intentional in who you network with and also the companies that you choose as well. And look out for those opportunities for professional development during that, if you are currently working and also going to school.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So as a student, I think when you're looking for, hey, what is that first role going to be as I'm in the middle of my program or as I'm getting ready to graduate, take a look at the kinds of roles that you're interested in and what requirements they have in terms of what job responsibilities, you know, if you were to join that role tomorrow, what job duties would you have? What are their requirements? And you might find that they don't actually require specific credentials for those roles that you're interested in. If they do, I think then that's a conversation that I recommend you to have with the faculty in your program or the program director in your program. Thank you. Okay, so another question we have here from Rensky. I am in my final year of my master's based in New Zealand, and I've noticed with jobs popping up for an administrator, coordinator, for you to have 3+ years experience. I've completed a degree 10 years ago and did various jobs, so I believe I have a variety of transferable skills. But how do I communicate that I may fit a role in IO or HR without, I think specifically IO HR experience?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I had some challenges with this myself, again, switching from kind of nonprofit program coordinating goals to looking for a much more IO specific job. And yes, I had this degree, so that was helpful. But sometimes employers are really just looking at past experience. I think and I should also say part of my job with one of my previous roles at a nonprofit was helping AmeriCorps members. So again, people who did a volunteer year of service translate, okay, you just ran a tutoring program for kindergarteners. How does that translate into a job you might want to do that has nothing to do with teaching? And so I think it's kind of figuring out, there's like some common employability skills frameworks that I absolutely love. Like literally, if you Google it, like 21st century skills, common employability skills, there's a lot of these different frameworks, since employers understand that people have different job experience where they're learning these skills. And so I would say it's all about, what is the job description that you're looking for? What are the pieces that stick out to you most, and how do you frame your resume or whatever your talking points to show, okay, I did this and here was my title. That may not lead to thinking I can do this, but here's an example of something I did that leads exactly to this skill. And I would say it's all about like doing the work for the employer. You don't want to leave them guessing. Like you want to do the job of, I think it's like the STAR interview framework we maybe talked in class, or even like the behavioral skills framework, where it's literally like, okay, here was the situation. Here's what I did. Here's the action I took or the approach that I had. Like, here's the specific skill I think this highlights, and here's how I could do that for you. And so it's really kind of doing the work of saying, here's what I've done. Here's that skill. Here's what I could do for you. So I would say, even if you don't have like traditional HR or IO in your job titles, there's probably still so many skills that you have that you can draw upon in those transferable skills. And the other thing to mention is, for job descriptions, you don't need to hit 100% of what they're asking to apply. And especially for women tend to really undervalue the skills that they have. So, put on your hat. If I was a man, I would just apply to this. There's a lot of gender differences in applying for jobs, just to, throw that out there. So I would say, if, it's a job that seems interesting, if you have some skills you think you could argue, go for it. And get feedback from a friend or someone else too, so that you can have an extra set of eyes. And if they understand what you're saying, then it probably is an employer who maybe doesn't have experience with what you've done might understand too. So that's kind of my top job tips.
And get on LinkedIn too, please. I hope to see you there. Connect with people that you see that may be in the realm or may can get you connected as well. Utilize your network as you can.
And I think just one last thing I'd add to that is, I think the point was made earlier by Nathan about informational interviews are so important. And I remember when I was making my first career transition from like working in an academic library to international development, I thought to myself, I would just implode thinking about reaching out to somebody for an informational interview. I thought no one would ever want to talk to me, and that I was this huge imposition. And now, fast forward 10, 12 years, when people approach me for an informational interview, I'm so delighted because I feel like it's paying it forward. So just don't be shy about requesting these things, because the people on the other end, 98% of the time, and you don't want to talk to those other 2% anyway, but 98% of the time are so happy to talk to you about whatever the career might be or the job may be. And then you can use that information to tailor the great experience you already are bringing to what that job is going to require.
Use your student card too.
Definitely. Thank you all. I really want to highlight a few things that each of you talked about, which is, one, do the work for them. What Kelly mentioned, it's so important. When you think about applying to a role, depending on the role that you're applying to, could be dozens of applicants, could be over 100 applicants, right, applying to that particular role. So you really want to make sure that you're making it as easy as possible for the recruiter who's looking at your application, at your resume, to really craft it so that you can show how you fit for that role super easily, because so that you can make it to that next step. As a part of that, one additional thing I'll say is build out kind of a portfolio of some of your projects that you've done, so that in addition to your resume that you share, maybe it's a website that you can showcase some previous projects, talk about it in a little bit more detail. That's really, now it's built into our practicum course. We require students to have portfolios completed before they graduate from our program, because it really helps you to stand out. And I think Cali and Danielle, I know you had Matt for those classes, Nate, you had me. I think doing that project really even shows you how much you've done, which is a lot, right? And then finally, about the informational interviews, such a benefit of being a student. Like, I think professionals are so willing to talk to you if you say, hey, I'm a student, I really want to learn about your career. Like Nate said, use that student card, right? Like, really show that, hey, I'm a student, I'm really here to learn. I want to just get to know your path a little bit more. And people are very, very willing. Okay. So let's see, got a couple more questions here. So Mary asks, what are the income possibilities when combined with previous work experience? And how can we know our monetary value? It's an important question.
I just put inside the chat something that SIOP creates every year, and that's the expense report. Wait, let me go look. Income and employment report as well. So one thing that I know, they do the work for you overall, and that you are able to look at the ways that people other within the industry get paid. It doesn't talk too much about the work experience, I don't believe. I haven't looked at it in depth for sure, but yeah, that's a resource overall. And do your research as well. And also, don't be afraid to ask, how much is this role? What is the compensation gap with this role as well? I think I'm saying that wrong, but someone will correct me as well. If you are in a job interview, there's no harm in saying what is the range of your wage as well, because hey, if it's not posted, I think some states it's required to give that.
It definitely is. And I think more states will see moving towards that. I hope at least posting a range with the job, so you know if it's even something you want to go for. But yeah, just to echo that, it's easier now than ever before to get your hands on that information, especially if you're looking at larger companies, going on things like Glassdoor. It really, you can access this information now, especially through your network. Now I'll be the Nathan and say use your network and your your resources to ask if you have people that you feel comfortable with. I really love the moves we're making towards salary transparency in the US. I think it is far overdue, and it's really just leveling access to information for everyone in the job market. So definitely put in the Google time, and I think you'll find what you're looking for.
Yeah, those are excellent answers. It's very true. Like, don't ever feel hesitant to ask what the salary range is for any position. I mean, whatever role it is that you're interviewing for, they have to have had an answer before that role got posted. And I think any job, we do it because we love it, but we also do it because it's our livelihood, right? So, and there's nothing wrong with going in with that mentality. It's just as important. And so just as Danielle said, it's time to start talking about that with greater transparency. And I'm glad also to see the trend moving in that direction. Okay. Our next question here we have is from Brianna. What do you wish you knew when you first took on roles within the IO field?
I'm going to start off with this one. One thing that I know when I first got at the University of Minnesota, I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go ahead and get like refreshed on my data analytics. to be like ready for R so I can go ahead and get the employee engagement data together. I was like, I got this, I can do this. And then when I got ready for it, they're like, we have a vendor, Nate. I was like, all right, cool. At least I know how to do it, you know? So, but I still utilize data analytics for some of the surveys that we do for our team and for our program. So it's essential, but I will say, if you're like, oh my gosh, I need to know everything, no, feel free to reach back out. I know I asked Nikki, I was like, hey, I need some OD materials. My drive has gotten swiped out because I forgot to renew my email for UMD. So feel free and you don't have to know everything. So know who to go to.
Cali and Danielle, do you have anything? Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I really wish just quickly that I knew sometimes how resistant leaders would be to change. They say that in class a lot, especially in your change management class. But when you're actually in it, and I'm sure my co-panelists can relate to this, when you're actually in it, it is so resistant. And sometimes the change is so slow because we tend towards our natural state and what works for us, as opposed to what might be good for us in the long run. It's just so human. You can hear all you want that like there is resistance to change, but until you actually are in it and you experience the resistance and the force of it, it's quite stunning. I wish I knew that before.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. And I think going off of that and something Nate, you said stood out to me of like, don't work harder than your client. I think even if your client is internal, it's kind of knowing where's the right places to push or the right battles to fight versus like, you can't make everyone do everything perfect. Everything's not going to change at once. So like, how do you figure out not the path of least resistance, because that might be good, but kind of it's really understanding like the people first kind of this, no one cares what you know till they know what you care. And as cliche as that might sound, I found that matters in all the different jobs that I've had, is really trying to understand someone else's experience is just so critical, because you could come in with the best data, the best idea, but if it doesn't work with what's going to kind of be next for that organizational leader, they could say they care all they want, but it might not happen. So I would agree with that. Yeah, that's all.
Great, thank you. So next we have a question from Randall. What were the most important technical skills you learned in the IO Psych program that directly translated to the work you do as professionals?
I think for me, and again, I switched to private sector shortly after finishing my degree, the like business fundamentals class, but it was specifically the like writing for business piece. And I don't know, who's currently in the program and which professors you had, but I had Matt for that class. And I feel like I learned a lot from his examples of how to synthesize things very briefly. And I tended to be very wordy. So figuring out really how do you make the right summaries? How do you make your section headers be a summary for what it's about to say? Like blew my mind, felt so obvious. And then it was like, oh, this is great. And I would say some of those just like very clean. I mean, you have reports for every single class, consulting reports for every class. And as much as you might feel like the end of the term, you're like, I'm writing so much. At the same time, honing those skills, I think were the best things that I've taken, because now I've been able to really hit the ground running. And again, I've noticed very differently in a private sector where like time is money. The fact that I can summarize very quickly, make my points very quickly, but have information to back it up should they want more has been really beneficial. So I would say like that technical skill. And the other one is just like better surveys. I think, again, I was one of those people who was like, I know how to make a survey. That's not hard. It's like, oh, no, you actually need some skills to do this properly and not double barrel your questions. That was probably my survey deadly sin that I maybe did a lot. So, and if you guys haven't done the survey class yet, I would say that was really helpful. Just that piece was another skill of just really being able to do good surveys and think of the analytics after of like, how am I going to measure this? How am I going to do this after? I think has been those two for me were the most important.
I wanted to say the data analysis piece, but I honestly haven't used it. I was like, I'll keep using R. I'll definitely practice. And I just didn't, and that's just real. I think for me, it was more, the job analysis, employee retention pieces. I use that a lot in my day-to-day, especially in the labor market in the US right now, and for the past, few years. So pieces around employee morale and engagement were really important for me now in my day-to-day.
Translation that you learn through the program, I would say a lot of the work that I do is really translating the things for many various leaders, because I can come in with my solution any day, but until I can actually coach that leader to making effective changes, it's just me preaching to the choir. So trust me, the projects and also the presentations as well, that has definitely been beneficial because I was able to reflect and like, okay, why didn't that click for the person? And it's more of that, well, you gave them 500 things at once. And that's what coaching sort of is. You like see what sticks, but also knowing what's very pivotal and actually repeating that back to them. And actually, there was one individual that I was coaching and I got into what they liked overall, and it was music. And I made a music analogy, like we're co-creating just like when you look at a ballad. And they're like, oh, that was the most important thing that you said all today. And I was like, this has been an hour and 30-minute conversation, and that's all you got. So it's fun. That's all I got to say.
Thank you all. So we got a few more questions here. The next one's from Isabella. I know Nathan mentioned following your path, and I'm thankful for that. Do you think you should be in an HR role while doing this program, or gain experience where you can or are?
Where you can and where you are. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I've been working in higher ed, and it hasn't been in HR all this time. Before I came to the University of Minnesota, I worked as a career transition specialist at Hawaii Job Corps. And before that, I was working in the Department of Fraternity Sorority Life, actually able to play a little bit about their selection. So that was during the program. So I was able to apply some of the things I was learning at that moment. So anywhere you are, anywhere that you can practice, and if it's pro bono too, trust me, during the program, I was in with the projects that I was doing as well. I asked many of my mentors, which was every instructor that I had. I was like, what projects are going on right now? What can I jump on? And that is how you are able to build your portfolio overall. So I would say where you are, you don't have to be in HR.
Yeah, agreed. Same. I was working at the Do Good Institute in very much a program coordination role in nonprofit while I was in the program. And I think what was great was I was able to not argue, but present to my organization leaders like, hey, I'm in this program. I see like we could use X, Y, and Z. I'm doing a case study. Can I do this? And because I'd already worked there, they trusted me. And it was interesting to see how pretty much any workplace needs IO at some point. I've found, and I don't know, my co-panelists would say the same when I tell people like, oh, I studied IO, and they're like, what? I'm like, oh, it's, basically making more effective organizations and supporting the employees that work there. And almost 100% people go, oh, I need someone like you at my job. And so I would say no matter where you are, you can make that work for this program. And honestly, it's probably maybe better if you stay in your current role because it will be a lot of work, and not having to navigate a new job plus the program at the same time might be beneficial. And then once you're done the program, you could leverage that to a new job. So there were people I know in my cohort that did switch mid-program and that worked for them, or, just kind of was one of those things that had to happen. You follow your path, right? Is that going to be the tagline of our session today? But I wouldn't switch jobs just because of the program or to feel like you need to prepare for the program. Wherever you're at is going to be fine.
Wonderful. Thank you. So our next question is a little bit unique. It's from Randall. And Randall asks, if you had to describe the life of an IO psychology practitioner using a book, movie, or song title, what would you use and why? If any come to mind right away.
That's such a good question.
Old Yeller. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I was trying to think. I'm still trying to think.
I'm going to cheat and use a book from the program because it just came to me. But for one of the classes, we read like the art and science of training. And I feel like that's exactly it. It's like partly science, but partly art of figuring out, again, what's the foundation and the skills you need, but also like, how do you just work with people and finesse things and meet everyone where they're at? And so that's one I've come back to, and I would say it has been super relevant of like, it's art and science. It's not one or the other. That's an excellent question. I wish I was more creative than using an actual program book, but if I think of something better, I'll pop back in.
It's a real thinker. Honestly, my brain just keeps saying "Welcome to the Jungle." It's just a Guns N' Roses song. But I do think there's a lot of like trial and error, and I think that's okay because it's a pretty complex field. And yeah, I'm gonna stick with "Welcome to the Jungle." I love that question. I might steal it for the next time I'm asking questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll say in taking kind of a popular culture lens, a couple of things that make me think of IO psychology, and then not because it's addressed directly, are just like a lot of the Michael Schur shows, like The Office or like Parks and Rec, where you see like everybody coming to whatever it is that they're facing at that episode with different perspectives, and like you need somebody to like just say, hey, we got to get in line and like take in everyone's perspective, but like focus. And so not kind of a direct answer, but that question was interesting and it made me think of those kinds of shows.
Or Severance, if you've seen Severance. I think it's only on Apple TV, but it's a really good illustration of like what not to do in the workplace. So it's kind of the opposite of your question. Like, don't give your employees like pizza parties to reward them for tons and tons of work. So.
Great. So our next one is a little bit related, but do you have any book recommendations?
I know I'm going through my bookshelf right now. I'm like,
I recommend this one to everybody if you're interested in kind of the intersection of IO psychology and working internationally. It's called The Culture Map by Erin Mayer. You probably can't see that, silly blurred backgrounds. But it is very good. It talks about the differences in cross-cultural communication and different work styles abroad. And so if you have any interest in that, I highly recommend this book. Absolutely. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Callie and Nate?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. This isn't exactly an IO, it's IO adjacent, and I don't have a specific book. But a lot of the work that I did in my previous nonprofit roles had to do with design thinking and human-centered design. And I found that worked really well kind of in parallel with IO, of it's really, again, kind of putting people at the center of what you're doing, but in a way that makes sense for both those people and the organization you're working with. So it's all about defining a problem that's in scope for you to solve and do something about, not so big that you can't tackle it, and not so narrow that it's not making the change you want. And so, yeah, I've just found that so much of the design thinking work I've done has been like bolstered by IO or vice versa, and using those principles together, I think, have worked really well. So I've found there's a ton of like design thinking articles out there. So I've just Google it. I don't have one specific book to recommend, but yeah.
off mute. Okay, there we go. So I have this book right here, the decision book. This is something that I utilize with many other work that I do. Take a screenshot a little bit, or it's recorded, never mind. You don't have to take a screenshot, you can rewatch this. This is another book. I love buying books. I'm not even gonna lie to you, I really do. And then the Art of Coaching workbook definitely helped out a little bit. And also, shameless plug, Victoria and also Certrice. This is something I'm giving out as Christmas gifts, because let me tell you, I have given this to one of my friends, and he was a plumber actually. He was like, oh my gosh, I never knew how much went into organization. I was like, this is very simplistic and it's very easy to digest too. So I would say if you're ever going to give a gift, give this away. I promise you. So I'll have them drop the link. You can find Certrice and Victoria. They're very popular on LinkedIn. So just reach out.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So next question is from Brendan, and this question is actually piggybacking off of a previous question, Isabella's. So I know a few people who have studied IO and currently work in HR. I myself studied IO and in HR right now. I find it difficult to get into IO related positions with only an education background. I was wondering if you had any advice for breaking into the field.
Come on through. Come on, let's be an academic IO. Let me know when you want. No, I'm kidding. I'm gonna take a stab at this a little bit. I would say if you're having difficulty, definitely try to look at the roles that you have. And I always tell students that are trying to prepare for a new role to look at their resume, go on jobscan.co and look at some things that you may be missing or lacking overall. And if you are like just coming out of school as well, and you've been in school for the entire time period, I definitely would say utilize the organizations that you've been working with as well. If you had any, because I was in 2 fraternities, 5 different organizations while working in my undergrad while having a double major. So I was like, everything that I could, I was able to utilize and say, this is how I effectively assisted organizations overall. So take everything that you have, write it down, and translate it overall. And don't be afraid to have someone look over it that's also in HR as well, to see what may be lacking or what skills that you may be able to work with them to gain as well.
Wonderful, thank you. So I received a question that was sent to me that I want to put out here. So for those of you that have worked in government and private sector, which sector have you found was more accepting of the practices of IO Psych?
I'll take a slight stab at it. So my first round in government, I didn't even know what IO Psych is, so I don't feel like I could judge there. But currently I'm in a private sector company consulting for Peace Corps, which is a government organization. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. And I'm in a role where we're building custom software and I'm on the organizational change management side, right? How are we changing or training everyone to use this, but also how are we changing the organization so they actually use this in their practices? I would say, like, for government, there's so much bureaucracy. And so it's trying to figure out, like, where are you getting pushback because people are having a hard time understanding what this is going to mean for their jobs versus where is their pushback because it's just like, yay, red tape. So that's something we've been working on, is kind of just navigating that together of understanding. So I would say, and this is a good question, because I guess I don't think of the work I'm doing as like in IO terms, even though it's IO all the time. And so it's more figuring out the specific pieces. So I don't know if I have a good overarching example as much as, like, yeah, it's really varied, I would say, for me, based on project, based on who's the leader. There is some organizational culture pieces, but a lot of it comes down to, like, what's happening at the time, what are conflicting priorities, and, you know, who's kind of managing that. And then where I think IO principles come in, and what we've all kind of talked about today, is really finding your champions, working with them, and understanding, like, what's the right level of scope to be pushing things forward. So I don't know if that was a good answer or not, but I would say, yeah, it's hard to think of comprehensively when so much of it kind of comes down to very specific use cases for me, I think. But yeah, government red tape is, a lot of people want to do things, but it's working within the system. So it's kind of helping figure that out, I would say, is one of my biggest continual learning moments of my current work.
Thank you. This is Candace. Hi, thanks for answering that question. Oh, although mind that I jumped in. But I guess what prompted that question for me was something Danielle said. She said that she found that leaders were very resistant. You know, a lot of pushback. That's one of the things that you learned. And so that prompted that question, well, which sector, you know, have you all found that was kind of resistant to IO practices based on the leadership and how they are private versus government? So that's what prompted that question.
No, I think it's everywhere too. We have it in higher ed as well. It's more of, I never try to bucket into the sector, but also with the change management, because at the organization level, you have some resistance no matter what. You will have those that are like champions within the work that are ready and wanting to do it, while also there are some that will just be fearful. So I think it's just sometimes human nature, no matter what sector. But I will say I've heard that when looking at the public sector within like the organizations that are here in Minnesota, that it's more of, they get in line a lot more when leadership says, you need to do this. Higher ed is more of a, we need you to do this and we need assistance in getting you there. It's like, okay, cool. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, something I'll say also, just to follow up on my earlier point, and this is the same in nonprofit too. And what Nathan said in terms of fear, I think is a big one. And I know in the public sector, so in certain government jobs and in nonprofit, it's hard to make a change that even you have data for could be a good change if you can't prove that it's going to work. And so sometimes it's a challenge to argue that, like, okay, well, our data says this in the past because we did it a certain way, but if we make a change, it could be better. And this is why we think this will happen. But that's where some resistance can come, because if your funding is on the line, if you have grants on the line, then sometimes doing something that even seems smart can be pretty fear-inducing if it doesn't actually work. And so I would say, yeah, it's figuring out where that resistance is coming from. Is it because you're too many priorities? Is it because you're afraid? So that, I think, is another big one that just kind of came to mind as we were chatting.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have 2 other questions in the chat. And I'm going to start with Chloe's, because I think this is Chloe's first question, and then we'll end with Mary's question. Chloe's question is, which qualities of professional experience in sales or big tech could you translate to an IO during an interview?
So I'll hop back in. So the consulting firm I work for right now is a tech firm, which is very much outside of my comfort zone. But I think the reason I was hired there and why I was interested is they had a specific organizational change management role that I'm in, because tech systems, need so much organizational change management training and all of that. So for me, at least, finding the IO role in tech wasn't actually as hard as I thought, because most tech companies need training management, they need employee engagement, they need professional development, they need HR. And so you don't need to be a tech person to understand that. And I think it was shared with me that one of the reasons I stood out to them was because I had such a different background, but had the academic experience, that they kind of trusted that I could do something very different, but drawing on that. So I think, again, professional experience for me was really translating in my interviews that, yes, I've only worked in nonprofits, higher ed, social sector, but here's where I see you all are doing the same thing in terms of working with clients, in terms of customer service, in terms of, writing very thoughtful reports, and in terms of that change management. And so it wasn't as challenging of a switch or a interview process as I think I might have thought at the beginning. So yeah, I guess for me, again, it's tech, but it's finding where I fit in within that. And I don't need the tech skills in order to find a place that I really fit.
And I can't specifically go into the details for that, but also look at individuals that work within people analytics as well. and like doing some informational interviews with them, because I know that there are many, when looking at the spaces I'm in, such as Blacks in IO, Latinos in IO, and Asians in IO, also PSYOP as well. I know that there are a couple of individuals that pop up in my mind that may be able to give some insight. So connect with me a little bit later. I could probably bridge you to a couple of individuals.
Wonderful, thank you. And for our last question comes from Mary. Mary says, the IO field has so many tools of the trade. Are you utilizing any personality testing, other types of leadership skills testing, and what trends do you see in the field you're currently working?
I can take that one quickly. I mean, in my field, international development, I think it's more germane that I work for a larger organization. I was actually really surprised. We don't do personality testing for any type of, employment purposes or screening purposes. I was actually surprised how expensive it is to obtain validated personality testing or other type of testing. And without that validated thing or validation, a larger company is not going to go through the risk of utilizing a test. And so it is incredibly expensive to actually deploy those tests. And when I graduated, full transparency, I was like, we're going to do a personality test over here and a skills test over there. But getting actually validated tests is quite expensive, and absent that, with as litigious as we can be sometimes in the US, a larger firm or a risk-averse firm is typically not going to utilize those a ton. We do, however, use some metrics, like we've done Strengths Finder in the past. We've done that for team building activities, and that's where I think that is actually really meaningful to do, because it tells you a lot about your colleagues and in smaller team settings.
Lifting when I tell you, no, it's all fun and games, but we utilize Hogan overall, and this is for leadership development. We usually don't utilize it for, I want to say, selection, just because I always say when working with clients, it's not about the data points. It's really about the story and the context that's brought with it that makes it valid. So that is what we utilize. And I definitely, looking at the holistic being, and I can definitely talk a little bit about the different skills, HGS, HPI, and motivations, values, and personality inventory too that we utilize. But for that, I definitely say self-awareness is very important for every individual in order to know how their path will emerge and also how they interact as well. Being neurodivergent and also from the South, that self-awareness was very critical for my development as well. So I just appreciate that. And yeah, it is expensive. It really is. So if you want to know a little bit more about Hogan, feel free to reach out as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all. This brings us right up to the end of our session already. It really flew by, didn't it? Again, I want to say thank you so much to each of our panelists for sharing your career paths, what you've learned along the way, how you're utilizing IO, your advice to all of our participants here. It's so valuable. I know, I remember back to when I was a student, like these kinds of panels were so incredibly insightful. So it's wonderful to be able to hear from you and pass along all of your experiences as well. So very, very much appreciate it. If our participants can connect with you on LinkedIn or elsewhere, please feel free to pop those links into the chat for them to connect with you. And thank you to our participants for attending as well and asking such wonderful questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you all again, and this concludes our session.